The Gulf Coast from Louisiana to Florida Panhandle prepares for the possible arrival of Hurricane George this weekend. Hello, I'm Jill Brown and welcome to this edition of Weather Center. We're continuing our special coverage on the forecast of Hurricane George. At this time in the forecast center is Jeanne.
Thanks a lot, Jill. Well, Hurricane George leaves behind a path of destruction across the Caribbean, and already it has claimed over 300 lives. Let's show you what happened yesterday as it pounded Key West. It brought the ocean onto city streets, down trees and power lines, and destroyed a number of houseboats and floating homes, wasting away some of the land. Winds of more than 100 miles per hour ripped through the area. Now it looks as if the storm may be threatening to slam into the Mississippi Delta area sometime later in the weekend and into Monday. I'm joined now by our hurricane expert, Dr. Steve Lyons. You've been following this for quite some time. It's been quite a onslaught of problems, and at one time it was a major hurricane plus some.
That's right. It was much stronger, and it could still become a major hurricane again. That's a problem. We want to get rid of this thing as fast as we can. At least we'll never have to talk about it again. I think the name will definitely be retired.
As we look at this particular satellite picture, I like this because it shows us what's been going on over 48 hours.
That's right. It's a 48-hour loop, and you can see the track from basically the Dominican Republic over Haiti, across Cuba, across the Keys, and on up into the central portion of the Gulf of Mexico. So it gives you an indication of where it's been and roughly, at least in a projection, where it might go. And that projection there, at least in the short term, will work out pretty well. Should be up in here within the 24 hours, and then up into the Mississippi Delta. Could go a little bit farther east, but that hurricane warning area that you'll see in a minute is the area that we really are concerned with most.
Absolutely. Let's give everyone an idea of what's happening right now. The latest coordinates as of 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time, 26.3 north, 85.9 west, which centers at 360 miles southeast of New Orleans, Louisiana. Winds at 105 miles per hour. It's moving west-northwest at 12 miles per hour. Now, it could strengthen in the next 24 hours, and it could slow down. So those are two key elements that we're going to talk about a little bit more. Just want to give you a heads up. Hurricane watches and warnings. I believe we can zoom in on this a little bit better and give you a nicer picture here. We are talking about hurricane warnings from Panama City to Morgan City, Louisiana. So that means that hurricane conditions are possible, are probable, in likely, I guess I should say, within about 24-hour period. So that's something that you need to prepare for. We also have tropical storm warnings and hurricane watches in effect from Panama City to St. Marks, Florida, and just hurricane watches in effect for this particular section of Louisiana, just west of Morgan City to Intracoastal City. Now, a lot of folks in Pensacola, Florida are starting their preparations. Not everyone is taking the storm lightly as the call for evacuations goes out. Many residents are boarding up their homes, and that is a very good idea, and I imagine that a lot of folks are underway doing that kind of thing right now.
I hope so.
So look at our other satellite vantage point. I want to point out where the center of circulation is. Actually, the eye is very visible. That's
right. We can see a very nice circulation center associated with the eye, and here it is on the infrared satellite imagery. You see it right there. Right around that center right there, we'll see it when I take it off. There you go. And also notice now the ring of deep thunderstorm activity that looks like a donut, a red donut, has showed up very nicely. And here it is in a very close visible image. You see the eye there with the deep thunderstorms around it. And now the tropical storm force winds are starting to close in on the northeastern Gulf of Mexico here. We now have winds gusting to 30 miles an hour or higher at Panama City, and this whole area in here is pretty much tropical storm force winds are higher now, moving down toward the hurricane.
Wave action already a problem.
Already a problem, and we have some buoy observations out in these areas, that not that many buoys, but a few observations out there that would indicate that the waves are about 20 to 25 feet, which would put breaking wave heights upwards of 30 feet or higher by tomorrow afternoon.
Looking at the radar, we can see some showers and thunder showers starting to redevelop here on land in Florida. But folks in the Keys, with cleanup efforts going on, things are looking much better for them.
That's right. What we're seeing here is we're getting sort of a convergence of an air mass from the south here, from the hurricane, and from the southeast. And that, combined with the surface heating, is producing some isolated heavy thunder shower activity there over the central Florida peninsula.
Not a whole lot of rain, though, in the Florida Panhandle, in that hurricane warning area where folks are preparing.
Yeah, right now we're in great shape up in here. It won't last too much longer. You see some of these heavy showers moving up into the radar view there. Keep in mind that some of this activity out in here near the eye, which is about right there, is above, the radar beam is above the circulation center, which means it goes into outer space there, and so we can't see it anymore. But some of these heavy showers, as they approach the coast of the Florida Panhandle and off toward Louisiana, could be severe. So those first series of rain bands could be tornadic. Be very careful, and they'll be on you probably later tonight and tomorrow.
We talked about the projected path earlier. Let's pin that down a little bit and talk about the timing as well.
Okay, here's the area where we expect the hurricane force wind potential to affect the coastline, and within that, the hurricane path should be somewhere near the Mobile, New Orleans area. It could track a little bit farther north there. The important thing to keep in mind is the hurricane force winds are likely to affect you wherever there are warnings. The worst case scenario would be for the hurricane to track just to the southwest of New Orleans, because then the storm surge would come in here in the southeasterly flow and produce a storm surge that could be rather large and potentially very harmful.
Let's talk about the storm surge for folks in New Orleans itself. It is just unbelievable when you look at some of these figures.
Yes, luckily we're not in the Category 5. This is a catastrophic situation with 30-foot storm surge. Right now we're in the Category 2 range and potentially bordering on a 3 at landfall, and that would make potential storm surge heights on the order of 15 feet maximum values near the coastline in the New Orleans area. If it landfalls a little farther to the east, that's better news for storm surge, because in those cases the storm surge will go down by as much as 50% as it moves toward Pensacola. However, the wave heights there go way up compared to New Orleans, and the wave heights, the waves breaking on the beach will lift the water level as high as 4 or 5 feet. So you have to add that on too. So you've got a combination of things, and the waves really destroy the coastline when the surge comes in. So the potential damage to homes is probably worse a little farther to the east, but the potential loss of life is probably more dangerous in the New Orleans area.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Steve Lyons. We'll check back with you in about a minute. Welcome to this edition of Weather Center. I'm Jeanette Jones. Hurricane George continues to be our top story this afternoon, but we're also looking for more severe weather in the Midwest, and summer hangs on in the southern plains. But first, Hurricane George is on target for the central Gulf Coast. Let's go to Jill Brown in the Forecast Center for the latest developments.
All right, thanks, Jeanette. We have not seen strengthening of George through this afternoon, but the one thing we have seen is it's slowed down and is threatening to stick around a little longer than maybe first expected. Take a look at the visible satellite picture, and you can see a well-developed hurricane with a visible, well-defined eye, a center of circulation there in the middle. And we'll continue to watch this as it heads to the northwest. Folks along the Gulf Coast are making preparations. Hurricane watches and hurricane warnings are in effect at this hour. The watches and warnings extend from, well, the hurricane watch is from St. Mark's to Panama City. It's also a tropical storm warning. We also have a hurricane watch from Morgan City to Intercoastal City, but it's in between that we're most concerned about. This area from Morgan City to Panama City, where there is a hurricane warning in effect. That means hurricane conditions are expected within the next 24 hours, and all preparations should be rushed to completion, and that's what should be going on right now if you live along the Gulf Coast. The last-minute preparations before nightfall tonight, preferably. Joining me now to talk about Hurricane George is our hurricane expert, Dr. Steve Lyons. And Dr. Lyons, we expected to see this strengthen, but in the last 24 hours it has maintained that 105 wind speed. That's been good news. It sure has been good news. The recon is out there. They haven't found any falling pressures. It's still not on land yet, though, so we could still see some strengthening to Category 3 before landfall, but so far, so good. All right, we'll take the good news when we can get it. Take a look at the latest stats on Hurricane George. And this is the 1 o'clock update. We should be getting a new update within the hour. Winds are 105 miles per hour. It continues moving west-northwest at 12 miles per hour. That is expected to change. We'll talk about that in a moment. Pressure, 975 millibars. And the one thing that you can see there was that long track of Hurricane George. This one's been around, Dr. Lyons, for a week, and this satellite picture shows its progress in the last 48 hours. We've had 300 deaths in the Caribbean, but none so far in the U.S. We'd like to keep it that way.
Yeah, it might be mine if it keeps going the way it's going, but it's continued on here on a rather steady track, and you can see that that's going to continue, and if it continues on the track it's gone on the last basically 24 to 36 hours, it's heading toward the mouth of the Mississippi. That's our best bet right now.
And when it came across the Florida Keys, we had really relatively minor damage, no injuries, no death. That's been good news, but people really shouldn't take that lightly if they're in line for the next landfall.
They sure shouldn't. A lot of people were evacuated from that area. That's one reason why we had such minimal loss. Well, we had no loss of life, at least it's been reported so far. But if you take it lightly and you're on the coast anywhere near water, I can bet you there will be some loss of life.
All right, we hope that won't happen. Take a look at the strike probability here, and you'll be able to see these areas that are threatened. Again, there's some margin of error with this. Dr. Lyons, do we expect any change in the track when we get the new information from the Hurricane Center?
I don't think they're going to change it too much. I think still the primary area is basically here from the extreme western Florida panhandle over to the mouth of the Mississippi, with New Orleans right under the gun. Keep in mind there's always a possibility it takes a track a little more north toward Panama City, or in the extreme case more toward Lake Charles. Right now the Lake Charles scenario looks the most unlikely to me.
And that's not unheard of. When Hurricane Aaron came in, it made a pretty quick turn, and folks in this area know about that in Pensacola. They weren't expecting a landfall. So the tracks do change sometimes.
They sure do, and in a scenario like this where we expect it slowing at the coast, it could always hang off the coast, then drift one way or another and actually end up landfalling in another location other than what we expect now. But right now that's not what we expect. Okay,
good news. Let's take a look at what's going on in Pensacola. Our crew's been standing by. Kristen Dodd has been in Pensacola, Florida, on the Panhandle, where they've already started to evacuate as many as 95,000 people. Still looks like a nice day there. Kristen, what's the latest?
Well, Jill, it is a nice day here, and they are evacuating. At least evacuation orders have been issued. At this point here on Pensacola Beach, though, it's a little bit of a party atmosphere. A lot of folks have come out to the beach enjoying one last sunny day. Unfortunately, a lot of alcohol is also being consumed, and that may make for a bad combination as folks now begin to head over the bridge as we get closer to the evening hours. We are beginning to see the first signs of Hurricane George off into the horizon. High thin cirrus clouds now beginning to show up, as well as some towering cumulus. Also, look at the surf here. It is just absolutely phenomenal, especially for an area that on a normal day would almost be lake-like, glassy surf. The surf here is about 6 feet and crashing and continues to build. Not the best day to be out swimming in it. The surfers have given up on it. They can't even paddle out over the large breakers, and it's definitely a dangerous situation to be out, especially when you consider these beaches are not guarded since we are after the season. Evacuation orders have been given. We do expect more people to continue to head toward the shelters and to the inland areas as we head through the afternoon and closer to the evening hours. Jill?
Okay, thanks, Kristen Dodd in Pensacola. We'll check back with you again later this evening as evacuations continue in that area. Dr. Lyons, we see on the radar that they are just pretty close to the outer band of rain, so things will deteriorate there.
Yes, they will, and some of these outer bands are typically the ones that have severe weather in them, much like we saw earlier. And one of the bands is here over Florida now. That has shown some signs of severe weather, but this is the one I'm a little more concerned about right now. This one out in here, heading toward the coast right along here, and Kristen isn't too far away from there. That could produce some severe weather in the way of tornadic activity. So be very aware of bad weather there, and take cover immediately if thunderstorms come your way.
All right, let's talk about the future path of Hurricane George, and the fact that it may be slowing down a little bit is of real concern.
Yes, it is. It's not been moving as fast as it had, and as we look at the projected path, this sort of gives us our outline of what we think will be the hurricane force winds, and potentially the outer limit to where the track would be. The official track we think would probably be somewhere in here or maybe up into here. Still a little bit too early to tell, but keep in mind anybody in that hurricane warning area should be expecting hurricane force winds. The other thing is Category 3 is forecast by the Hurricane Center before landfall, and finally the speed of motion is to slow down rather dramatically Sunday morning, Monday morning, Tuesday morning. So it's slowing very dramatically at the coast. That sets things up for potential flooding from rain.
All right, a long period of time with the strong winds and the rain could mean some big problems, especially in New Orleans. We'll keep you up to date. Thank you, Dr. Lyons. We'll be checking back with you. If you'd like more information on the internet, weather.com is our website. You can get tropical information or the weather where you are. Speaking of the weather where you are, we'll have the latest on that as we take you back to the studio and Jeanette Jones.
All right, thanks a lot, Jill. I want to remind everyone that this Weather Center is sponsored by Allegra. Well, as we check out what's happening across the rest of the country, quite a lot. This area of low pressure starting to push on off towards the east is producing some really intense thunderstorms. We've had reports of wind gusts.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Weather Center. I'm Lisa Moser. Hurricane George continues to be our top story this afternoon, but we're also looking for more severe weather in the Midwest. And summer hangs on in the southern plains. But first, Hurricane George is on target for the central Gulf Coast. Let's go to Jill Brown in the Forecast Center for the latest developments. Jill?
Okay, thanks, Lisa. We do have the latest update from the Hurricane Center with a significant change on Hurricane George. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Take a look at the satellite picture and you can see a well-defined eye as George continues to move off to the northwest with eyes on the northern Gulf Coast. People there should be preparing for landfall perhaps late tomorrow into Monday. Hurricane force winds are expected by tomorrow afternoon, so you should be completing your preparation at this time. Let me show you where the watches and warnings are in effect. So if you're anywhere from Morgan City all the way over to Pensacola, you have a hurricane warning, meaning hurricane conditions are expected within the next 24 hours. You may not see the center of circulation go right over your area, but hurricane force winds are expected, and whatever you can do at this time to prepare for the strong winds, the storm surge, and with this hurricane, an unusually high threat of flooding, then you should be doing that this evening, because by tomorrow it may be too late. Joining me now to talk about Hurricane George is Stu Ostra, a meteorology supervisor. Every time a difficulty with that. We have had a change come now with the latest information on Hurricane George, and this looks significant.
We have had a change, and it's not a good change. We have a serious situation, which frankly is getting more serious by the hour. The hurricane hunters found a drop of the central pressure of 7 millibars in a couple of hours. Now we still have to wait and see whether that's a real trend or just a blip, but usually 7 millibars is more than just a blip. And also we had gone about 24 hours without much of a change, so this is something we're going to have to watch very closely, because the hurricane, which is already dangerous, could be intensifying further.
So as you see the pressure drop, you typically see the winds rise. That's a sign of strengthening. Take a look at the latest stats on this hurricane, and you'll see that the winds have gone up a little bit, from 105 miles per hour to 110 miles per hour with this hurricane. That one thing that's significant about that is it is a borderline Category 3 at this point.
Category 3 starts at 111 miles per hour, so we're very, very close already.
And the movement is now northwest at 10 miles per hour. That's a slight change as well.
Yeah, it has wobbled perhaps a bit more northwest than west-northwest over the last couple of hours. That may be temporary in general. As you look at this track, it's followed a pretty straight course, which would put the center headed toward the Louisiana coast. But with these little wobbles, even though you need to make sure there's a trend there and smooth them out over time, that's another example of why everybody in the hurricane warning area needs to be prepared and needs to assume that the potential for hurricane conditions will exist.
And it's certainly not unheard of for a hurricane to switch that direction, especially as it gets closer to land. That becomes critical.
Yeah, once you get closer to land, some of these little variations can become important, particularly if the wind field is very concentrated right around the center.
All right, let's take a look at the satellite picture of the last 48 hours. You can see the motion that this hurricane has taken. It is one that's gone over several land masses. We're about to see the final landfall of Hurricane George. What do you see from the satellite picture that's significant?
Well, we see, I guess, a couple of things. One, it's followed that pretty steady path, just as we saw in the track frame a couple minutes ago. Also, we see how as it starts over again right in here, it just didn't look quite as robust as it was going over land. It was still robust enough to unfortunately cause a lot of problems, but now it's out over the open water of the Gulf of Mexico. That water is very warm, and at the bottom of the hour we were talking about how maybe the battle that it was fighting with some marginally unfavorable conditions out ahead of it was a draw over the last 24 hours. With that pressure drop that the plane found, it might be starting to win that battle, and we also see some of these deeper clouds starting to come around the west side, and that's another sign that it may at least be starting the re-intensification process. Whether that process continues, we're not sure, but the potential for it to continue does exist.
Okay, and with those first signs of an increase in strength now of Hurricane George, again, folks along the coast in this high strike probability area should be, again, completing preparation and evacuating if told to do so. Anyone from New Orleans to Mobile to Pensacola making those last-minute preparations, and that's where our own Kristen Dodd has been standing by through the day today as tens of thousands of people have been evacuating and boarding up. It's still a nice day, but you can tell that surf behind you, Kristen, is rough for the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh, that's right, Jill. It's, as you mentioned in the last half hour, a typical day before a hurricane makes landfall. Very hot, very humid, and we are seeing those clouds now begin to build in the background. You can see some of those cumulus beginning to tower up, and the Gulf is definitely beginning to churn. Normally in the Gulf of Mexico, we are pretty much glass-like, very calm waves, but today has not been that case, as the surf has definitely been very choppy and continues to break farther and farther out. Now, this heavy surf has been causing some problems just down the beach about a half mile a half an hour ago. A swimmer had to be rescued, a near drowning taking place there. Apparently the man just got caught out in surf that he was not able to handle. Fortunately, it does appear that he is going to be okay. However, he has been taken to the hospital. We also are seeing right now some of the water beginning to creep closer here to the wall where I am standing on Pensacola Beach. Other areas, I am told, the waves are already beginning to lap at the dunes. This is actually one of the widest stretches of beaches still available. Now, through the day today, the folks here at Pensacola Beach have been boarding up their homes and getting ready to evacuate. They also have been preparing their boats. In this area, we have many marinas where boats and fishing boats are docked, as well as sailboats. Today, they've been trying to moor those. They've been taking them away from the docks out into the open water and anchoring them. In case of a storm surge, they will not be bumping into other pylons and other boats. And so a lot of preparations have been taking place here. Everyone is watching this potential storm's path very, very closely in case it does take that more northerly jog, as might happen. Even if we only get tropical storm force winds, the folks here are definitely fearing a possible storm surge. So we will continue to watch it and watch the progress of evacuations very closely.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. Down in Pensacola Beach, Florida, where conditions may be deteriorating very quickly this evening. And we'll be watching you through the next couple of days in Pensacola. And this may last for a couple more days. This is one that, because it's moving so slowly, could be a huge flood potential.
It could produce a lot of flooding, very severe flooding, and there are two components to that flooding. The water from the Gulf of Mexico coming onshore with battering waves and storm surge, and also rainfall-induced flooding, and they can actually work to cause each one of those to be worse, because the rain falls, the water's coming onshore, the rain doesn't have anywhere to go either.
Okay, that's one of the big concerns with Hurricane George, and again, the fact that it's moving slower and intensifying, the biggest concern at this hour. Thanks to Stu Ostro. We'll keep you up to date on Hurricane George and the weather across the rest of the country. You can always check out conditions on the internet, weather.com, and you can always find out what's going on across the rest of the country at this time of the hour. Lisa Moser is standing by to talk about the rest of your weekend.
Isolated tornadoes are a possibility this afternoon and evening over portions of Wisconsin and Michigan. We'll check that tornado watch in just a moment. Thanks for joining us here on Storm Watch. Let's begin with the latest on the tropics. Our tropical update includes, first off, a view of 4 hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin, including Hurricane George, of course, and then there's Ivan, Karl, and Jeanne. We'll update you on the other 3 hurricanes in just a moment. We'll first off show you, of course, George here in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, and this is Hurricane Karl. This is Hurricane Ivan racing rapidly eastward, and this is Hurricane Jeanne. More about them coming up. First, the latest. According to the 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time advisory from the National Hurricane Center, Hurricane George was then estimated to be centered near latitude 26.6 north, longitude 86.2 west, or about 335 miles to the southeast of New Orleans, moving toward the northwest at 10 miles per hour with maximum sustained winds near 110 miles per hour. A little increase in strength since earlier in the day, and the central pressure reported by reconnaissance to be 968 millibars. Now, in light of that position and strength and movement, hurricane warnings are posted now from Morgan City, Louisiana, eastward to Panama City, Florida. Also, hurricane watches in effect eastward from Panama City to St. Marks, Florida, and a hurricane watch covering a small area west from Morgan City, Louisiana, back toward Intracoastal City, Louisiana. Additionally, we have, as we take a look at the satellite view, you can see Hurricane George continuing to make that northwestward progress. Distinct eye there as the counterclockwise circulation shows up very clearly in this color-enhanced infrared satellite view. You may remember that the brighter reds and oranges indicate the colder, higher cloud tops typically associated with a heavier rainfall. And this is a big rainmaker and a sprawling hurricane with its effect being felt over a wide area. In fact, even now, some of the outer rain bands beginning to move in toward Apalachicola. Some heavy rain falling from time to time in some squalls coming through the Pensacola area. Where is Hurricane George heading? Well, as we noted, it's moving at this point toward the northwest, and the official forecast track, according to the National Hurricane Center, would take Hurricane George right pretty much through the center of this cone. Now, what we draw here in this graphic in the darker red area here, the high probability strike area, means that this is the area where it could very well be making landfall ultimately. There is the cone, because any slight variation in the angle of movement of Hurricane George would, of course, vary the point where it would make inland or make landfall. So residents along the Gulf Coast, certainly over a wide area, should stay tuned and keep up with the very latest on Hurricane George. We'll be keeping you aware of what we're hearing from the National Hurricane Center and what our own hurricane experts are determining as we keep an eye on Hurricane George by way of satellite and also the reconnaissance aircraft. Very grateful, of course, for what we're learning by way of the Air Force Reserve reconnaissance flights into Hurricane George. Well, here is George, here's Karl, here's Ivan, Jeanne, 4 hurricanes at once in the Atlantic. First time that has happened since 1893, which means it's the first time since records have been kept of tropical systems. First time that 4 hurricanes have been in the Atlantic Basin at one time. Latest on Hurricane Karl, maximum sustained winds 85 miles per hour, moving now to the northeast at about 18 miles per hour, centered 1,200 miles to the west-southwest of the Azores. Hurricane Ivan out in the Atlantic. Incidentally, Karl and Ivan, Jeanne, all 3 posing problems for shipping interests, but no threat to any land areas. Ivan with maximum sustained winds of 75 miles per hour, moving to the east at 33 miles per hour. And Hurricane Jeanne, a minimal hurricane with maximum sustained winds of 75 miles per hour, moving to the north-northwest at 12 miles per hour out in the central Atlantic. Across the U.S., we're keeping an eye on severe weather possibilities over portions of lower Michigan and Wisconsin, where a tornado watch is in effect. No warnings within this watch area at this point, but earlier severe thunderstorms have caused some damage, places like Otsego and Clare counties.
I'm Kristen Dodd in Pensacola Beach, Florida. Evacuation orders have been issued ahead of Hurricane George. I'll have a live report next on Weather Center.
In the global economy, companies can't afford to shut down, so America's largest generator of electricity never rests. Southern Company uses its resources to track the availability of oil, gas, and electricity 24 hours a day. We keep our customers up and running while saving them millions. So at the end of the day, they know we're still at work, keeping the power on. We are Southern Company.